The film depicts the desperate hustle and sometimes rule-breaking that is required around the world to make a living in an economically challenging setting. The film depicts poverty, desperation, and inequality, emphasizing the stark contrasts between wealthy and poor families. Ki-woo Kim is a young man living in the slums of a nameless South Korean city with his family, which includes his father, Ki-taek Kim, mother, Chung-suk Kim, and sister, Ki-jung. The family lives in a garden unit where they struggle to find a Wi-Fi signal to connect to the internet and watch TV, are encased in, and must endure seeing men urinating and puking in the alley outside their home. They make money to survive by doing simple jobs like folding pizza boxes, and even then, they are called out by the pizza workers for messing up the boxes. Ki-woo's wealthy friend Min Hyuk visits the family and presents them with a gift, a rock said to bring wealth and prosperity to those who possess it. He then informs Ki-woo that he has been tutoring the teenage daughter of a wealthy family. He is leaving to study abroad, but he loves the daughter and knows that any other university boys would take her away. He wants Ki-woo to be her tutor, knowing that he will look after her so that Min Hyuk can propose to her after she graduates from high school. Ki-woo realizes he isn't qualified because he isn't in college, but Min Hyuk promises to vouch for him, so he agrees and has Ki-jung forge credentials for him to bring to the interview. Ki-woo interviews with the extremely wealthy Park family, where he meets Mr. Park, his disorganized wife Mrs. Park, and their two children, teenage daughter Dae and young son Jasong. Ki-woo realizes he needs to flirt with Dae in order to get the job, and he does. Mrs. Park pays him a large sum of money and mentions that they need an art tutor for Dasong. Dasong experienced a traumatic incident in which he saw a ghost in the house, had a seizure, and has since required assistance with his art. Ki-woo introduces them to Ki-young, who forges documents for herself and goes by the name Jessica, and she, too, begins making a lot of money quickly. When the Park's limo driver drives her home, Ki-young leaves her underwear in the vehicle to get him fired. She then recommends her uncle as the new driver, who is actually Ki-taek. Moon Kwang, the housekeeper, holds the final position. She has worked for the home since before the Parks moved in. She previously worked for the eccentric architect who owned it. In order to get her fired, the Kims exploit her peach allergy, causing her to have allergic reactions, and then convince Mrs. Park that she is seriously ill and cannot be around their son. She leaves, devastated, and Mrs. Kim is given the job, duping the Parks into hiring the entire Kim family. The Kims plan to get each of them a job with the Parks. Ki-woo recommends Jessica, aka Ki-young, as an art therapist for the Parks' young son, Dasong, who was traumatized after seeing a ghost in their kitchen. Ki-young frames Yoon, Mr. Park's chauffeur, by making it appear that he had a sexual encounter in the car, and then recommends her relative's chauffeur, her father, Ki-taek, to replace him. The Kims take advantage of the Park's longtime housekeeper, Moon Kwang's peach allergy to convince Mrs. Park that she has tuberculosis, and the Kim matriarch, Chung-suk, is hired to replace her. Ki-woo starts a secret romantic relationship with Dae, making the young teenage girl fall in love with him, thus betraying his promise to his friend Min Hyuk. The Kim family enjoys their significant increase in income, and when the Park family decides to leave to go camping for Dasong's birthday weekend, they take advantage of the opportunity to spend the weekend in the massive Park house. They've spent the evening drinking, eating, and generally making a mess. The doorbell suddenly rang. They were surprised to see the old housekeeper. It's Moon Kwang. She claims she was fired in such a hurry that she left without being able to retrieve anything and simply wants it returned. Mrs. Kim reluctantly lets her in, and Moon Kwang rushes into the basement and starts screaming, revealing a secret passage behind some shelves. She goes to her husband, Gun-se, who has been secretly living in the bunker since the previous owner left to avoid predatory lenders. Moon Gwang's husband, Gun-se, is revealed to be hiding in the bunker from loan sharks. He is also revealed to be the ghost Da-song saw attempting to emerge from the bunker to steal food items from the park's refrigerator. She feeds him while Mrs. Kim looks on in horror. She tells Moon Kwang she has to leave, and Moon Kwang begs her to let them stay. When Chung-suk refuses Moon Gwang's pleas to allow Gun-se to remain in the bunker in exchange for regular payments, the rest of the members of the Kim family, who had been eavesdropping, falls off the flight of stairs and into view, and they call each other Dad, which Moon Kwang records on her phone. Realizing the family's con, she threatens to send it to the parks and then uses it to coerce the Kims, and the Kim family gains the upper hand, forcing them into the secret bunker. But the Park family calls. They've cancelled their camping trip due to rain and will return home in 8 minutes. The Kims scramble to clean up as much of the mess as possible while keeping the other two in the basement. They do a good enough job that the rest of the family can hide while Mrs. Kim serves the park's dinner. When Moon Kwang escapes and runs upstairs, Mrs. Kim shoves her back down the stairs, where she hits her head and is severely injured. Moon Kwang and Gun-se are locked inside the bunker. Mr. and Mrs. Park end up sleeping in the living room to keep an eye on Da-song, who is camping out in the backyard, forcing the Kims to stay under the table, frozen all night, even as the Parks complain about Mr. Kim's unpleasant smells. Mr. Kim heard this while he was under the table hiding. Later the couple had an intimate evening before sleeping. They eventually managed to sneak out at night. They return home to find their apartment completely flooded with rainwater and sewage. Ki-woo takes the rock, and the entire family spends the night in a shelter. The next day, Mrs. Park decides to throw an unexpected party for Da-song. The Kim family, in their roles as helpers, are invited and must pretend they are unaware that there are 2 people locked in a bunker beneath the house. While Mr. Park asked Mr. Kim to play along with the hide-and-seek, it was clear that Mr. Park could smell Mr. Kim's bad odor, thus making Mr. Kim squirm with shame. While everyone was enjoying the party, Ki-woo enters the bunker with his scholar's rock and kills Gun-se and Moon Gwang. Moon Gwang has already died from a concussion sustained during the previous day's clash, but Ki-woo gets assaulted by Gun-se, who uses the rock to knock him out, leaving him in a pool of blood in the basement. Gun-se then stabs Ki-young with a kitchen knife in front of the shocked guests. The party explodes in horror, and Da-song has a seizure. Gun-se was the ghost he had encountered in the house before. Mr. Park screams at his driver, Mr. Kim, who is attempting to stop Ki-young's bleeding, for the keys to the vehicle to take his child to the hospital, and he throws them at him. They land under Gun-se, who is battling Mrs. Kim. She kills him by attacking him with a meat skewer. Mr. Park receives the keys but expresses disgust at Gun-se's odor, which triggers Mr. Kim, who snaps and attacks Mr. Park, killing him. Mrs. Park faints while Mr. Kim flees. Ki-woo awakens in the hospital, having been in a coma for several weeks. He discovers that Ki-young has died, and he and Mrs. Kim are sentenced to probation. Mr. Kim has yet to be found, despite the fact that the police have been looking for him for Mr. Park's murder all over town. When Ki-woo completed his probation, he went uphill to visit Mr. Park's house. Ki-woo leaves the house, where he notices the lights flickering. Ki-woo translates the flickering from Morse code and discovers that Mr. Kim is controlling them from inside the bunker, where he is now living, sneaking upstairs for food from the new owners. Ki-woo responds with a letter to his father, resolving that one day he will become wealthy enough to buy the house and reunite their family.